Operation Move podcast. My name is Zoe. I can tell that my voice is still a little bit funny from talking for over an hour at the end of last week. But this week, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different, which is running shoes and how to figure out what you need, what is going to suit you, because it's a huge expense and it's a bit of a minefield, to be honest. So we'll be diving into that this week. So to start off with running shoes, there's probably a few things that you need to know about most shoes, and that's going to help you sort of refine down what you're looking for, because you want to kind of like limit the field as much as possible because there's so much to choose from. So the first thing that you want to know is that most shoes are categorized as either being neutral or stability. And what that means is if you're neutral, then your foot doesn't roll too much through your stride, inwards or outwards. And so that's the kind of thing that you can just tell by like having somebody like look at you from behind while you run, or you can go and get a gait assessment at some specialist running shops too. But the other way around it too is just to work out like what shoes you have that are comfortable and look up what type of shoe they are, and chances are that's what you should be in, because comfort is 100% the thing that you should be paying most attention to. So that's one of the factors of shoes. The other one is heel to toe drop, and that just means that generally speaking in traditional running shoes, your heel ends up being about 10 to 12 millimeters higher than your toe. And in minimalist running shoes, there is no difference. And there's usually a range between them. So, pure sort of minimalist zero drop shoes, it's 0, 0. More traditional running shoes are 10 to 12, but you can also have ones that are more like they're low drop, they're more like 4. Things to be aware of with that is that with a lower drop shoe, that will tend to put more demand on your calves. So if you are finding that your calves are super tight, then, well, for one thing, we should probably be looking at like more posterior chain work, like more hamstring work, more glute work, more squats. But from a pure shoe perspective, you might want to look at a higher drop to combat that tightness in the calves and overloading the calves a bit like that. But also for like sometimes when people have other issues, then like say for example, like when I had shin splints, going to a lower drop shoe just sort of like helped to sort of like retrain my stride a little bit. So there's, you could dive very deep into the school of thought of, your traditional running shoes versus your natural running shoes or your minimalist running shoes. And that is that's like a whole other conversation, but those are the options. And again, I would just go back to, you look up your shoes and you see what their drop is, and if that is comfortable, then that's kind of like what you want to be going for. If you're going to be introducing either one or the other, you want a slow introduction to that, because some people are really able to go in between two heel heights really easily. It doesn't faze them at all. And for other people, it's going to be more problematic. So you just want to sort of like ease yourself into that, and not like just like go and, like put new shoes on and run for an hour and then end up, being really sore afterwards. For me, generally speaking, I can go between heights pretty easily, but I have found that since I had some flares up with plantar fascia after sort of like all of my injury and strength imbalance, that I do better at the moment with a higher drop, more traditional shoe. So the other aspect of shoes is sort of like their cushion level. Like you'll have sort of like things that are considered more racing flats, which have much more minimal cushion because they're lighter, they're faster, you've got better contact on the ground, and they're also going to be good for heel work because you want that ability to push off. Like, you don't want to have that feeling that you're just like pushing into cushion. But for longer runs, that cushioning can feel much nicer. So those are the kind of like the variables that you're dealing with, and you'll be able to get like a really good sense from what you're currently wearing, like where in that zone that you are. So generally speaking, for my shoes, I would have easy running shoes or long running shoes, and they would tend to be like pretty comfy, pretty cushioned, and just in general, like I would probably go for sort of like something that's like maybe a little bit wider in the toe box, because you over a long run your feet are going to sort of like swell up a little bit, and that is going to happen. So for me at the moment, what those long run shoes are the Adidas Ultra Boost X, and I haven't tried the sort of like just the straight Ultra Boosts, but they have been really good for me. Generally speaking, most of my shoes, I would like to see them last in anywhere in the vicinity of 600 to 1,000 kilometres, and they lasted me about 750. So they're right in that zone, and they're about, I'm a neutral runner, so they're neutral. They're about like a 10 to 12 millimetre drop. I think they're about 10. And then for hill stuff, and in the past for sort of like sprints as well, I've used the Adidas Adizero shoes, and they are similar drop but less cushioning. So it's sort of like easier to sort of like have that impact on the ground, push you off. And again, neutral. And then I have like a sort of like a faster shoe, which I have been running in, which is the Nike Zoom Flyknit. Not sure if is there another word in there. There might be, but basically they're the budget version, and they didn't seem very budget when I bought them, but they are the sort of like the more accessible version of the Breaking 2 shoe that Nike developed. I'd never run in Nikes before, and they are hands down my favourite shoe. They make all of that sort of like, you know, like race in them. I do them for, you know, like long workouts like threshold things and tempo things, and I can even sprint in them. And they're very, because they've got that sort of carbon plate in them, they're unlike other shoes that I've run in. And so because they've been so good, I've been kind of looking at, I've got to replace my easy running shoes. So I've been looking at the other shoes in that family for that, which would be the Nike Zoom Pegasus. So that is another thing that you can do. Like if you have a shoe that you really like, you can, usually they sort of have like a family of shoes to sort of like hit those different types of sessions. And so you can go, okay, if I really like this shoe, then I'm probably going to like this one. And you can sort of also see what, again, just looking at those parameters. Like I know what happens when I run in a stability shoe. Yeah, running in a stability shoe was how I got really awful shin splints when I was a new runner. And so I know to stay well away from anything stability. And I've also found recently, as I've just sort of like been sort of trying to strengthen my calves, what that means is that they can get tight overly easily. So it's just a bit too much work for me to be in my sort of more like 4mm drop shoes, which in the past I have primarily run in Hokas, and they was always really comfortable for me, but they don't do any traditional drop shoes. It's all sort of low, like 4mm. So it's all on that sort of low sort of spectrum. So those are the kinds of things that will go into your choices with shoes, but it's also really good to keep in mind that most companies will have very fancy language for their shoes and all of their technology, like this kind of foam and this kind of cushion, and like all the technology that they're working on to make their shoes better. And it's not like they are trying to make the shoes better, but none of it really is any better at determining what's going to work for you other than your comfort factor. So, like if you try on shoes and they don't feel comfortable, they're never going to feel good. They're not going to get better. And if you try on shoes, even if like maybe they're not sort of like super popular running shoes or whatever else, but they feel comfortable, and just go with that. Like that is the best guide that you can have. So it's also good, if possible, to go through like either a shoe shop, or if you're shopping online, somewhere that has a good return policy. So if you run in the shoes and they're just not good, then you can return them and try something else, because it is one of those things where it's a big investment and you don't want to be wasting that money on shoes that aren't going to work for you. I mean, there are ways, like there certainly have been situations where I've had shoes and I'm like they're almost perfect, but they're not quite, and you can change the lacing style. So you can relace them to open up the forefoot, you can relace them to like pull up the shoe off the big toe. If something like that is bothering you, you can relace them to sort of like lock the heel in if you're getting a bit of slippage or blisters happening. So there are things that you can do to tweak them, but for the most part, if you're finding something quite uncomfortable, relacing them is not necessarily going to do the trick. Like unless it is just that like you just need that forefoot to be like a little bit wider, which I tend to, in which case relacing them can sort of like open it up and it makes it easier to run in. So those are things that you can incorporate into it. But generally speaking, and some shoes, yes, like they will take a little while to sort of break in, but you shouldn't be having any kind of like discomfort or pain in that breaking in phase. If you are, then like it's just better off to return them and find something that is going to work better for you. And like it can be small things. Like I've had shoes that haven't worked just because like the arch support was in slightly the wrong spot and it was just sort of like pushing up, and I tend to not be super high arched anyway, and it was just like there was nothing that I was going to do that was going to make that comfortable, or just like the way those particular shoes are, because you've got all those nerves down the bottom of your feet, like it was kind of like making a couple of my toes numb. Like it's just not going to get any better. And I think that it's hard because once you've invested the money, you really want them to work, but it's just not worth risking the injury or discomfort of running in shoes that are not 100%. And that is why people tend to be really religious about getting exactly the same shoes, because once you find something that works, you want to stick with it, which is also why it's very frustrating when they change their models and the new one doesn't work for you. But in terms of longevity, like I said, you are kind of looking at in between that 600 kilometre to 1,000 kilometre mark generally, but also 12 months. So even if you do find the perfect pair of shoes, there's no point in buying like 10 pairs, because the foam is going to start to degrade after 12 months. So you want to look at replacing shoes every year, or if those kilometres come up sooner than that, which for me they do. I think it does help having different shoes for different things, because say for example, like the sort of like racing and quality session shoes, I don't want to like burn up their kilometres in like all of my easy and long runs, because chances are those shoes are going to be slightly more expensive than my easy running shoes. So I'm going to get the most out of it if I save them for just the things when they're useful, and use different shoes for things where it's really just like just stay comfortable. So there's also it can also be like if you go onto, which I will sort of link up, there's some great shoe review sites where if you go on and you're like, if you like this shoe, then you're probably going to like these shoes, and these would be other ones to try. Or you can go and sort of like do a search and be like, okay, like I'm really interested in what people are rating as the best shoe for neutral road running in sort of like a competition setting, or, you know, like neutral road running for long runs, or whatever it is. So there's all sorts of categories that you can look at, and then you can kind of like just keep an eye out. What I tend to do, because I do live regionally, it's not exactly like I can just have like walk into shops and have access to anything that I might want. So a lot of my shopping is online. So what that means is that buying a new pair of shoes would be kind of, that I have not actually tried on, would be kind of a big risk. But if I can get sort of look at sort of like last season stuff that tends to be half price, it's a lot less of a risk, because if I get it and I try it on, and even if that retailer doesn't have a return policy, which most of them would, but I guess maybe not always if it's on sale, I can get pretty good resale value for that because I haven't bought it at full price. So it is just the kind of thing, like I know generally what is going to suit my feet, and so if I see something on sale, then I can grab it. And that sort of has been in the past how I've discovered some of the things that have really worked well for my feet. So it is a bit of a gamble, but you kind of know that, I know that if I'm buying something at a significant discount, then I'm not going to lose too much money by reselling it. And when I do generally in the vicinity of, you know, probably 90 to 120 kilometres a week, I would go through shoes relatively quickly. So I have to be pretty economical with where that comes from. So yeah, those would be the main points of how to pick shoes. And you can also kind of look at, you know, like if you're trying to figure out, I have been running in neutral shoes, but I feel like maybe I need some stability, like there's something about it that doesn't feel quite right. What you can also do is to look at the tread pattern on the bottom of some used shoes, and if they're like mine are pretty evenly worn because I'm neutral, but if you look at my husband's, he's not neutral and he's like always on the one side. So you can also get an idea based off that. That's going to help you to pick things, and it often though is just pure trial and error. And it's sort of like, it's one of those questions that, you know, like people always want to know, like, what's the best running shoe, but it's so individual. You've just got to try out different things and not be drawn in by pretty colours, which may or may not have happened to me in the past. So I guess also the other thing about shoes is, how do you know when to replace them? I have on Strava, which I use to log all of my runs, I have a thing where I can add the shoes in, and then when I put up my runs, I can pick which shoes I was wearing, and then it gives me an alert when I reach a certain amount of kilometres. But, you know, 600 kilometres to 1,000 kilometres is a huge range. And running on shoes where they need to be replaced is a bit sort of like, I think at one stage I'd been running in these shoes and they were working really well for me. So I'd run in them for everything and they were pushing 650 kilometres, but you start to feel that you can feel too much through the bottom of the shoe. So like when I run on the dirt road, it's just like feel too many of the rocks, and I think, you know, like they probably need to be replaced. And when I went to like my osteo appointment, she's like, replace them or get a stress fracture. It's like, okay, well, I'll replace them. So it is something to be aware of. And generally speaking, it is hard to get a sense of it in the beginning. Like, yeah, you know, as soon as you try new shoes on and then go in those shoes and you're like, oh, yeah. But things to look out for is if runs will start to feel a little bit more sluggish in those shoes, you'll start to feel like a little bit less like you're getting like a decent rebound off the shoes. You'll also probably just start to know that it's really worn off in the tread, or that you can just like bend the shoe like too easily. They're all signs that it needs to be replaced. And just, anything where it starts to feel like you're getting a few more niggles and they're in that kind of zone, then it's a good idea to replace them. So that's it on shoes. I know that with this kind of thing, like a lot of times it's hard to sort of, like you just want like, what shoes do I buy? Not like, oh, you got to try a whole bunch. But it is good to know, like at least to narrow it down to know what you should be looking for, and particularly when to replace them, because that's sort of like a key thing with injury, and also just feeling good on the runs. Like like good shoes should make it feel just like that little bit easier, and should just adds that sort of like extra support level to your running, particularly if you are running on days when you're a little bit more sore, where you might need just like that little bit of extra cushioning. Goes a long way. So that's it for this week. I'll be back next week. If you have any questions for the podcast at all, just let me know and we'll dive into that next week.